I simply, when I start mine in the morning, turn it on high, and then before I leave the house, turn it to medium or low, and it does its thing for the rest of the day.
Some planning, preparation, and a slow cooker are all that's needed to have a healthy dinner ready when you walk through the door at night. A slow cooker allows a variety of soups, stews, meats, casseroles, and other foods to be prepared over an extended period of time. However, there are a few rules of thumb for using a slow cooker and some food safety guidelines to follow. On today's Sound Living, maximizing a slow cooker. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State Research and Extension Nutrition Specialist Sandy Procter says the slow cooker has changed a lot since it was first introduced in the early 1970s, providing more ways to safely prepare meals without having to be home.
Back when the slow cooker first appeared back in the 70s, there wasn't a lot of options. There was a basic size, a basic model, and it had basic functions, low, high, and off. And things have really changed, including some of the temperatures at which the food cooks. And so we have encouraged folks, if they have a very old crock pot, those of us that, got one decades ago maybe as a shower present or along that line, it may be time to revisit, to be sure that it's still heating the way it should, that it gets up to temperature, gets hot in a quick manner, and then has a simmering ability to take it on through the day. And so one of the things I would consider is family size. When I first got mine, there was only one size, and that worked pretty well as our family was young and grew. But now I find that I use a smaller one more often, and I have also added to my collection a really small one that works nicely for sauces or gravies with meals, or even to hold hot appetizers when I have people over at my house.
They have kind of what I call the stand-up type, and then they have the more long oval shape that kind of clamps down, and that's the one that we've gone with because it seems like with a family of 4, that works pretty well.
Well, and you mentioned the clamps and stuff, and one of the things that I think is a super advantage to some slow cookers is the fact that you can clamp that lid down and take it someplace, because we all are pressed for time, and if you can make something and take it in the same container and know that you're not going to have it decorating the inside of your car or the car trunk and still have everything in the pot when you get there, it's a really good thing. And so having the lid that clamps down, that's a really nice feature. But it isn't necessary for those of us that are just doing the day-to-day, let's make sure supper's on the table when we get home sort of activity.
Also not necessary but somewhat convenient is the liners that go inside.
Oh, absolutely. And those, like you say, they're not necessary, but I've had people tell me that they don't even use their cooker without using that liner because it really helps clean up. But another thing that's just important to remember is that a quick spray of some sort of cooking spray will certainly help clean up no matter what you're preparing in your crock pot, because it's just a function of the tool that it's going to cook long, it's going to be at sort of medium to high heat and then low heat later on, and that food will dry on that crockery liner. And so spraying it ahead of time will really help ease the cleanup.
Let's talk a little bit about the process, because I've seen some things where it says you want to cook it at a much higher temperature for at least an hour because we're a little bit concerned about food safety, and then you may go to the lower settings. How do we know? I'm assuming that a lot of this is in the recipe, but how do we kind of maybe just some general rules of thumb?
The point you make is really good. One of the things that is always encouraged for food safety is to get that cooker up to temperature so you move through that food safety zone where you're going from cold ingredients to hot cooking, and you move through that zone between 40 degrees and 140 degrees where it's actually cooking really quickly. And that's where we want to make sure that the food doesn't sit in that zone for a long time and have the capacity to build bacteria. So just a good rule of thumb, some of the more deluxe versions actually have programmable things where it starts off with a higher heat and then lowers itself to a cooking or a simmering temperature. You can program it to do that. I simply, when I start mine in the morning, turn it on high, and then before I leave the house, turn it to medium or low, and it does its thing for the rest of the day. And that's how I do it, but I make sure that it really gets up hot and it's on its way before I step away from it.
That's really one of the important things about the slow cooker is the fact that you can do this early morning and let it go all day, and when you come home, you've got food ready to go.
You know, it's sort of the precursor to some of these services now where ingredients just arrive at your door, and with just a little bit of finishing or preparation, you've got a meal on the table. And I think it's really worth people's time to take some investigation, take some study, and figure out just how usable you want your slow cooker to be, because there are a variety of recipes out there. It doesn't have to just be a casserole or soup type, although that's one of our favorites at home. Is any variety of a stew or a soup that we come home to works well for us. But you can do casseroles, you can bake, you can do meats. It's amazing the creativity that people have gone into, and recipes are available on the web, but also you can find lots of tried and true recipes through your extension office.
And you can adapt recipes. It's a little bit complicated, but it can be done.
Yes, it can. Just being really careful to follow some of the basic rules about what types of ingredients go in, and knowing that sometimes quality can be impaired just because of the long cooking time. So you have to be careful to think about what types of ingredients you're using in your recipes.
This is a great way to stretch the food dollar, too, though, because in certain cases you can buy less expensive cuts of meat. You can use up some of those leftovers. You can use a lot of vegetables, which is another good thing.
That's exactly one of the big selling points that we talk about using a slow cooker with our program audiences in FNEP and SNAP-Ed, but for any of us. But you can take ingredients like dried beans, or you can take the very inexpensive cuts of meats, and they're actually improved upon with longer cooking times. And so really some of the things you read about cooking with a slow cooker say stay away from those nice lean cuts of meat, because they'll actually get overcooked and maybe go on beyond tender to tough because they've been overcooked. And we know when we overcook protein, it toughens. And so the ones that are already tender and what we would consider a more expensive cut of meat will actually maybe go beyond its best quality. But some of those ones that really take some time and prolonged cooking to really get at their best are absolutely perfect for a slow cooker.
And if you use the larger slow cooker, you've more than likely got leftovers or other meals. If you do a chicken in the slow cooker, you may get 2 or 3 meals out of that.
Absolutely. It really helps you sort of buy those foods that might be on sale or that are in a larger cut or a less expensive cut or version, and to take advantage of those, and then to be able to use, like you said, another meal left over, or perhaps for packing lunches. It really has a lot of options.
And again, this may take some planning. We always talk about that. You need to kind of plan out the week, or at least a few days in advance.
Yeah, very likely you're not going to be able to wake up one morning and think, I have everything I need to put on a meal in the crock pot. And that's not actually true, because you probably could have everything, but just the thinking about it ahead of time might allow you to get, say, those vegetables cut up and cleaned and in the refrigerator the night before, or prepare, say, stew meat cubes so that they're ready to go and trimmed and everything is ready and chilled in the refrigerator. Then in the morning, you have time to combine those ingredients in the cooker and turn on that temperature, like I said, get it up high where it's heating through very quickly, and then turn it down to the simmer or the longer cooking for the day before you step out the door.
You mentioned some things that you could do in the crock pot. Beans is something we see a lot of. Mm-hmm. Any type of soups. Are there some things that we need to keep in mind when we're doing something in the crock pot? I know that because of the way it heats that you have to have water in there. Do we have to have a certain amount of water? What are some guidelines?
Well, there are actually really good guidelines, and they're easy to follow, but you just need to remember that it's important to keep that lid on the crock pot while it's cooking. And the reason for this is it actually creates more moisture in this pot than you would normally have cooking stovetop. So you don't need to add a lot of water. And in fact, you can get too much and it will dilute the flavors. So it's important to follow those directions. And if it says just add a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup of water to the recipe, I would follow that, because more will be created from the steam that arcs up in that lid and then adds down to it. And you may be amazed that you'll put in several cups of vegetables and meat and turn it on, and there's just a little tiny bit of water in it. But when you come home, it's got a lovely sauce that's, several inches deep from the great juices that have cooked out of your ingredients. So follow the recipe closely and make sure that you start off with your ingredients that are chilled but not frozen. So many people have told me that they'll start off with a frozen piece of meat in the crock pot, and it's really, really not a good idea because food safety-wise, it's kind of like a quick version of thawing it on your counter because that outside part is going to get up to that zone that we talked about, the danger zone from 40 to 140, and the inside is still going to be frozen. And so you've got sort of this big, high-protein mass that's being held at a temperature that isn't safe because it can't heat it quickly enough to take care of that frozen center for quite a while. And so it's in that unsafe zone for quite a long time.
And we also want to resist the temptation if we're home on the weekend and using the slow cooker of peeking every so often because that lets a lot of the heat out.
Yes, and this is a message for, I don't know about your house, but in my house, some of my cooking fans that smell the great things that are going on just love to get in there and stir it. And that's really, we need to resist that. We let out that moisture. We let out the heat that it's worked a while to build up. And it's kind of got its own thing going. So a lot of what I read and from my own experience just says, just leave it on there and let it cook without interfering with it or stirring. It really doesn't need that like stovetop cooking does. It needs that ability to hold that moisture in, hold that heat in, and just cook uninterrupted.
You mentioned family, and that's another great aspect of using the slow cooker is the fact that when everybody gets home, you can all sit down, you can all eat together, and like you mentioned, throughout the day, you may even be able to smell all of that food.
There's something extremely encouraging about walking in the door and realizing that you already have sort of that next hurdle that's in front of you, dinner for everybody before the evening schedules begin, or you just, you've walked in the door from your day and already being on top of that meal is really rewarding in its own right, not to mention how good it smells when you walk in the door.
You have put together a publication that talks a little bit about this and things that you can do, which are called pulses.
Yeah, it just merely mentions a slow cooker, but praise for pulses. This is actually, here's a fun fact for you, 2016 is the year of the pulse, according to the United Nations. And I've had several people say, okay, what's a pulse? Well, we talk about this in this newsletter. Pulses are dried beans, dried peas, chickpeas, or lentils. They're all legumes, but not all legumes are pulses. So it's a class or a division of dried peas and beans. And the reason that we talk about them in the same breath that we talk about slow cookers is because they go together so well. These dried, high-protein beans and seeds, and they're inexpensive. They take a while to cook. And then if we use a slow cooker in that process, again, we've got this great possibility for variety in our diets, as well as great flavors and usually very low cost.
And if somebody wants to take a look at the newsletter, they can get that through their extension office?
Yes, it's called Good For You, and it's actually the newsletter that goes out twice a year to every SNAP recipient in the state, but it also is available through local extension offices, or you can find it on Facebook if you search for Kansas FNP, standing for Family Nutrition Program. And if you go there, you should be able to find the most recent copy of the publication. And the title of it is Praise for Pulses.
That's K-State Research and Extension Nutrition Specialist Sandy Procter. To test a slow cooker, fill it with 2 quarts of water and heat on low for 8 hours. After 2 to 3 hours, the temperature should reach 140 degrees. And after 8 hours, it should reach 185 degrees. More information on using slow cookers is available at county and district extension offices and on the extension website, ksre.ksu.edu. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.